The end of the Cold War and the invasion of Ukraine. To understand what is going on in Ukraine today, we must understand what happened in Ukraine yesterday. In this speech, I will explain how the end of the Cold War led to the invasion of Ukraine. Having had interest in the ongoing war there and analyzing it, to understand why what is going on over there is to look back at what led to this. After Ukraine's independence in 1991, it wanted to decide things for itself. After having been under Russian and Soviet rule for over 70 years, they wanted to move towards a more Western European influence. It wanted to break away from the Russian influence. Now that it was independent, Ukraine had many new opportunities. It was free from Soviet Russian rule and influence. It now could decide its own future. It wanted to become more involved with Western Europe. They also felt that this was their best chance to recover economically from the collapse of the USSR. They now could hold their first free elections. They could now trade globally. Even though this was not going to be an easy transition from its past life, a life without Russia was better. But it knew that Russia would never allow its border nation, a nation that wanted to join NATO, rest alongside of it. Over time, Ukraine knew it would need protection. Joining NATO was that option. Other post-Warsaw Pact nations did this. They knew that one day, too, Russia would want those nations back under its sphere of influence. Russia never wanted to have NATO nations near its borders. As stated by David Lane of Emmanuel University of Cambridge, he says, Gorbachev had offered an unconditional removal of Soviet military forces from Eastern Europe. In return for agreeing to reunify Germany, once he had received a promise from Western negotiators that NATO would never move 1 inch to the east. With Ukraine on Russian borders, it knew over time that the only way to disrupt Ukraine from joining NATO was to invade it. The rule being a nation is not allowed to join NATO if it is under a conflict or war. In 2014, Russian forces moved into the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. It also helped spark civil unrest in the eastern portion of Ukraine in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Ukraine then now could not join NATO. Russia's new goal was to spread its propaganda and pressure the Ukrainian people into believing life with Russia was the better route. But they found that that wasn't the case. As stated by Jerry Mankoff, Senior Associate of the Europe-Russia-Eurasia program, that to Moscow's surprise and frustration, however, the Crimean playbook had limited success in other parts of the country. So Russia had one move left, and that was to indefinitely ensure that Ukraine would forever be under its fold. In February of 2022, Russia invaded. Its goal was to create a buffer state between it and NATO nations, and also to utilize Ukrainian resources for its own. Ukraine was supposed to be a weak nation that should have fallen in 2 weeks. It never did. With a strong resilience of the people, a strong defense has thwarted Russian advances. It has beat them back, and it has them on the run. It did receive military aid and training from NATO nations. Over the last 2 years, Ukraine is draining Russia of men and its materials. But in this David versus Goliath task, it will need continued help to see the removal of all Russian forces in its territory. In closing, I hope everyone gained a little more insight into this complicated matter. Ukraine just wants its freedom from Russia crushing influence that is just in it for its own betterment. Ukraine wants to exist. Its people want to exist. We have seen the Ukrainian resolve, the willingness to fight for its land and its people. It does this against an enemy that has large numbers. Will this be their final task to finally break away from Russian influence and be free. Thank you.